Shalom, I'm Rabbi Michael Panitz. I'm the Rabbi of Temple Israel of Norfolk, Virginia, and I'm honored to be speaking to you from the pulpit of my congregation. At this time, my message is entitled, Abraham, Father of All Jewish Refugees. What was Abraham's status when he left his native land, his father's environs, and set out for the land that God promised to show him? Was he a spiritual adventurer seeking a virgin land for his new faith? Was he going where God told him because he walked with God? Since the Bible is silent as to Abraham's motivation, or for that matter, God's motivation, the rabbis suggest a variety of reasons. In one midrash, Abraham impressed God as the one man in his society to exhibit a moral passion for justice. Seeing that, God decided to take Abraham out of the settled city-state world of Mesopotamia to give him a fresh field to cultivate. But the most famous midrash, the one in which young Abram smashes his father's idols, speaks to our particular day in a truly powerful way. According to the famous rabbinic story, Terach, father of Abraham, was not only an idol worshiper, he was an idol maker. After Abram came on his own to believe in the one God, it became impossible for him to tend his father's idol shop. He smashed his father's idols. Abraham, the original iconoclast. That's the part of the story we teach in our Sunday schools. But the story continues in a darker vein. Terach practiced some tough love and turns Abram into the authorities. Nimrod, the head of the city, argues in vain with young Abram, trying to get him to worship any one of the gods of the pagan pantheon. Abraham out-argues him and demonstrates the folly of worshiping any god rather than the one God. Exasperated, Nimrod orders Abram to be executed by being cast into a fiery furnace. But just as God had saved the companions of Daniel miraculously from the fiery furnace, now in this midrash, God saves Abram from the same mode of execution. Upon Abram's emergence from the furnace, God says to him, "Get yourself hence from your land." In other words, the rabbis see Abram as the first refugee in our tradition. He left Iraq because those in power there wanted to kill him, and he went to Israel. That is the story of our people in the past century, too. Like Father Abraham in the rabbinic retelling, our people have been a nation of refugees. Refugees are all in the news these days, specifically Palestinians. They are the fourth or fifth generation descendants of refugees from 1948. Nowhere else in the world would they be known as refugees, but they continue to enjoy that classification thanks to the determination of the Arab nations that they shall not be resettled anywhere, but rather used as a tool for pressure against Israel. In this message, I want to tell you about Jewish refugees from Arab lands. We don't call their grandchildren and great-grandchildren refugees because the state of Israel took them in, granted them vital social services, and made them fellow citizens. As Moses tells us, Zechor yemot olam binu shenot dor vador, she'al avicha v'yagedcha, zikenecha v'yomru lach. Remember the days of old. Consider the years of ages past. Ask your parent, who will inform you, your elders, who will tell you. Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 7. Here is the history, freed from the nostalgia and tendentiousness of many of its retellings. Jews never enjoyed better than a second-class status in Arab countries. They were known as dhimmi, the Muslim religious term denoting their status as a protected minority. We must remember that Jewish and Christian social inferiority to Muslims in any Muslim state was considered a religious legal mandate within classical Islam. Indeed, for fundamentalists in power in many parts of the Middle East, that is still axiomatic today. That is the rock-bottom truth that is eagerly suppressed by propagandists and willingly ignored by well-meaning Westerners. No doubt you've heard it differently. You've heard of the spirit of tolerance in 10th century Cordoba, because that brief historical episode is much repeated by contemporary propagandists as if it were the norm. Here's the truth about that. In some exceptional instances, the second-class nature of Jewish life lessened, although it never quite went away. A few court officials, a few physicians, pharmacists, and perfumers, a few import-export specialists, enjoyed the passing favor of the powerful in Muslim states from Iberia to Egypt to Turkey. Still, the disabilities remained. Rabbi Moses Maimonides enjoyed employment as the court physician to Saladin in Egypt, but he rode to work on a donkey because Jews were prohibited from riding horses as part of their ongoing petty disabilities. Indeed, the daily reality for most of the Jews living in the house of Islam was similar to the disabilities we in America associate with Jim Crow or petty apartheid. When the United Nations announced the forthcoming creation of the State of Israel in November 1947, it signaled a rejection of that traditional hierarchical Islamic world in which stateless Jews were protected and simultaneously put into an inferior status by their Muslim overlords. Arabs immediately turned violently against the Jews of their countries. The violence grew worse when the state was born and fought off 5 Arab invading armies. The situation of the Jews from North Africa through the Middle East became perilous. Within a few years, most of those Jews had either been expelled or had fled for safety. Israel became the home for 50,000 Jews from Yemen and neighboring countries in 1949, a few months after its birth. Another 125,000 Jews from Iraq went to Israel as refugees in Operation Ezra Nehemiah of 1950-1951. The largest single national exodus was 250,000 Moroccan Jews who fled to Israel in the mid-1950s. Other Arab countries likewise turned up the pressure on their Jewish residents, producing streams of refugees. While a privileged few of the Jewish émigrés had European passports and went to France or England or Italy, the large majority of these Jewish refugees fled to Israel, the only country in the world willing to take them in unconditionally. When the refugees landed, Israel did not have housing stock for them. Indeed, Israel barely had enough food in those early years. Israelis had ration books, 1 egg per person per week, 2 for a pregnant woman or a nursing mother. But Israel took in the refugees, housing them in ma'abarot, transitional housing. The wave of refugees, in some ways like a tsunami, strained Israel to the breaking point. But Israel rose to the challenge. Not perfectly, but better than any other nation in history. That history of accepting our refugees, of taxing ourselves to the limit to absorb and care for them, gives us the standing to offer this advice to a cynical and selfish world. 24 countries across the Arab world have closed their doors to Palestinians. Maybe, instead of forcing Israel to absorb people bent on its destruction, we could this time move in the direction of a solution that could promote long-term peace in the world. We ourselves, refugees, know that home tugs at the heart. But we also know that home can only be home when one is willing to accept a neighbor, not murder him or dominate him, as the condition of going home. When the Arab world accepts that, we will find that peace will no longer be just a dream. Amen. May that day come.